Something doesn't look right, change the font.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, I believe we are live on the Facebook. I'm just going to check the forum page as well, at my forum hub, which should be looking good pretty soon. Alrighty, and I think we are ready to go with opening night of Sydney Whisky Forum 2020, which is redundant to say 2020 because this is the very first Whisky Forum ever. G'day everyone to wherever you're watching. My name is Scott Fitzsimons and I look after all things here, whisky and spirits related at the Oak Barrel, smack bang in the centre of Sydney CBD. And normally this week would be my busiest, most stressful, most anxiety-ridden week of the year, leading up to Sydney Whisky Fair. But alas, I've had a very calm, gentle week instead because of 2020 doing its best to ruin everything. But we're kicking off. This is the opening night of 10 nights of whisky chats and discussions, panels, tastings, all sorts of things with some friends from around Australia and particularly, as we can see today, from around the globe as well. So kicking us off tonight for a discussion around independent bottlers and in particular Scottish independent bottlers are four very, very good friends, some of which I've met in the flesh, others of which I've parted with via internet, and some of which we're meeting for the first time tonight from all over the UK. Can I give a quick g'day to Kira Hepburn from North Star, if you give us a wave, to Dave Worthington from the Boutiqe-y Whisky Co, Alistair Walker from Infrequent Flyers, and Eamon Jones from Rest and Be Thankful. Beauty, that works. That's a good start. So what I want to talk about tonight and have the discussion about is how independent bottlers in Scotland are working in 2020. Well, potentially better say how they were working in 2019 and how they're sort of reacting to the year, but also how the bits of it work. We've got people here who are owners of the company, brand ambassadors, people who do a lot of the back end working. So a few different aspects of the industry. And the only thing that really binds all these people together is the fact that they're regulars on the Oak Barrel store and at our fairs and that sort of thing. So g'day to everyone who's watching in the Zoom chat here. There's a few of us here, but also on the Whisky Fair /forum page and on the Oak Barrel social medias. But g'day guys, welcome to the Oak Barrel. If you haven't been here before, at least virtually into the bowels of the Oak Barrel tasting rooms at the back here. I'm going to just throw this one out here to anyone who wants to pick up the stick and run with it to start off with. But 2020 has been a year, and as in terms of independent bottlers as companies, what's been the most challenging thing to come over to get through this year? I mean, we were talking just before we went live there about bottling plants and finding space and planning and that sort of thing. But what's been the most difficult thing so far?
Well, I'll jump in. I think just kind of touching on what you mentioned there, Scott. Most certainly, I think all of the independent bottlers that are on this panel, we have to subcontract a lot of the things that we do to third parties, if it's bottling or labelling or cask storage and re-racks, etc. And with COVID, suddenly all of these things just closed down. So you had your plans. I was about to do release my third batch in March, and then suddenly my bottler called me up and said, "Look, we are going to be closed for the foreseeable future. I'm really sorry, but you can't get access to your stock." So I'm like, okay, I'll just have a few weeks watching box sets, and it's so these things are out with your control. That's kind of the big thing I found.
Yeah, I think
we've had a bit of
absolutely
that, but
agree.
we do have our own bottling hall as well. So we managed to keep our own bottling plant open, but yet we have got stock locked away that we can't access at the moment because of the distilleries or the warehouses have been closed. Absolutely. But we just managed to launch our latest collection, a World Series. So that's all world whiskies. But yes, it hasn't been easy, has it? It's been difficult getting stuff done.
I think that we were really relying on our bottling hall pushing through, which thankfully they did, albeit on a skeleton staff. But yeah, they were able to bottle for us. Every part of the process took a little bit longer, whether that be printing, bottling, or shipping, which obviously took longer due to the demand and on logistics throughout the whole world. But for us, it really relied on the bottling hall being able to still function, which they did. So we were able to launch our 10th series in July, which was kind of just about the time that it was due to be released anyway. But we were really grateful that everyone that's usually involved in the process was still working away, and it meant that we could do everything as fairly normal. And I did kind of notice that there was slight gaps, especially in UK retailers. There was still a demand for spirit. Whether that was single cask spirit, I'm not too sure. But I know that there was certain gaps for spirit on shelves. So I think that we were in a bit of advantage that because we were able to bottle and we were still able to get everything shipped, it meant that Series 10 was just as successful as all our other bottlings.
I think it's a really, really weird situation. It's like everything has been thrown into flux. I think in terms of engagement from consumers is like at unprecedented high levels because people have got time. You know, people have got time like they've never had before. So the engagement is there. People are spending a lot less, obviously, going out, restaurants, bars and stuff like that. So people are prepared to pay a bit more. And yet, you know, I suppose we suffered in terms of if we'd had a bit more stock out there and, you know, it would have been better. But I think going forward is going to be interesting because the big boys, if you look at Diageo, their share price is down, their earnings are halved. These boys are going to be discounting and they're going to be pushing stock out there, probably at levels that we've not seen for a while. So I think the implications going forward, you know, are all to be seen, but this is all pretty unprecedented. And the other thing is, accessing stock is hard enough at the best of times. What value will the big boys put on the stock now? Will any stock be released into the market? You know, so it's going to be it's all crazy days. You know.
I mean, that's actually. Sorry, I was
just going to say, Scott, what Eamon touched on there, that could go either way because you could have a situation where some producers that previously weren't putting liquid out to people like us might decide they want to make some quick revenue, and the policy might change. I can't say that I've seen that so far.
No.
But you know, you've got that whole thing combined with Brexit coming up and the situation with the tariffs in America. It's all still crazy and complicated, and it could change things, you know.
Yeah, it's something that I wanted to touch upon, and you know, let's dive right in. And before I ask the question, I'm just going to feel free. I know it's 10 a.m. where you guys are, but you're more than welcome to drink along with us Australians as well. But I'm jumping in headfirst into a 27-year-old Brookladdick from the boutiqe-y Whiskey Co. that I had lying around. But if you're drinking at home, please let us know what you're drinking. But yeah, I mean, part of the mystery and the intrigue that I think we see from Australia in these independent bottlers, and particularly independent bottlers that we love, is how hard do you have to work to find those casks? Like how many relationships over how many years do you need to build to find those things? And yeah, has there been, I mean, obviously, Kira, you were saying, you know, batch 10, which has been delayed a little while here. We're hoping to see it late September, October. Everything's a bit slower at the moment. But looking forward to batch 11, batch 12. Has this thrown a bit of a spanner into the works from actually sourcing stock right now?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think we've been around long enough now that we are able to plan ahead. I think probably when the company started in 2016, although I'm speaking for Ian here, I can imagine that the way he was sourcing stock was, stock that was ready to bottle, whether it be in the next 6 months or within the next 12 months. Whereas we're in a fortunate position now that we can sort of plan ahead. So Series 11, Series 12 is something that we've been talking about since the middle of last year, at this point last year even. So Series 11 and 12 won't be impacted at all. And at this point, we're even looking beyond that. What are we going to be bottling at this point next year? But that's only because the company's been around. We're still very young. We're only 4 years old, 4.5 years old. So we're still fairly young, but we have got to that point now that we're able to plan ahead. And Ian spent the last 4 years making great relationships with suppliers, and he also has a great nose for casks. So I would say that we are in the fortunate position that we won't see an impact to any of our bottlings yet. Whether, going back to what Evan was saying, whether supply does change this year, that will depend whether that affects us. It'll probably be, later on in next year, probably towards October to Christmas next year.
But Scott, I always think you remember they used to say in advertising that 50% of all advertising is wasted, but you don't know what 50%. Well, I'd say in our game, 95% of what we do is ultimately a waste of time, but it's that 5% that keeps you in business,
Yeah. Alistair, in terms of, the independent bottling arm with infrequent flyers of Alistair Walker Whisky, even though you've been involved in the industry game for a long time with Benriach Distilling Group before it was sold, you're probably the youngest in terms of the independent bottlers. You're up to sort of batch 3. Do you have much stock already built up that you're ready to roll out for future batches, or are you sort of running from batch to batch?
No, I've always, the one kind of mantra we had from even through days at Benriach and even before that at Burn Stewart, the most important thing is stock. If you don't have stock, you don't have much. And it's funny because, as you said, I've only been doing this for 2 years, but in 2018, so I registered my business. Okay, that's me. I'm an independent bottler. How many casks have I got? None. So you start from scratch, and you have to try and build an inventory, and it's kind of like a little two-pronged approach where, on one hand, Kira was talking about when you can buy casks that are casks that you can bottle immediately, and those are great. You can turn those around quickly. But so you're kind of looking for those type of casks. At the same time, you're buying other stock that in the background that you're just going to sit on. You're either going to just let it get older, or you're going to re-rack it to change the style. But you always have this uncertainty in this game that you don't know necessarily what the situation is going to be like in a year. So there's always this security blanket. If you can build up some stock whenever you get the chance, as long as it's the right stock and you're not paying too much for it, and then at least you have that in your possession and you're not constantly at the mercy of other suppliers as to what you might be able to get in the future. So stock is, I'm obsessed with building up the inventory. Sometimes to the point where I forget that if I don't stop doing that and actually sell some casks and some bottles, I'm going to run out of money. So it's trying to find that nice balance in there.
Yeah. Just a question for everyone on this. The Oak Barrel has bottled some casks over the years, either as exclusives as official bottlings, but also some indies. One thing I've noticed in the past 2 or 3 years is, and particularly being in Australia, is the prices of everything is going up. That's a given. But also the access of what we're getting, by the time it goes through Europe and Asia and, samples get to us, they're either, in the right price point and okay, or in the top end are like really great, but also really expensive. Have you guys found, particularly if it's like maybe, Dave with boutiqe-y as well, you've been doing it a little while with the company, getting access to what you want is harder to do? Or if you know where to find it, are they still out there?
So we've certainly built up some great relationships with the distilleries now. I mean, you know, with three sources that everyone goes to: the distilleries themselves, private collectors, and the whiskey brokers. But those relationships that we've built up, we'll be celebrating our 8th birthday next month, and those relationships that have built up allow us to get access to whiskey direct from some of the Scottish distilleries now, which we weren't able to get in the past. And most of our older Scotch, that boutiqe-y, for example, would probably be from a private collector. We haven't just concentrated on Scotch. I mean, we're passionate about, at boutiqe-y, we are passionate about great whiskey. And so world whiskey is something that we've been sort of working on over the last couple of years. I mean, our first release was in 2014, and we've just released 9 world whiskies from 5 new countries, from France, from Taiwan, single malts for 5 new labels, not new countries, but new countries with Taiwan and France. For us, we've never bottled a French whiskey or Taiwanese whiskey. In fact, this is my first ever Nan2, and it's absolutely delicious. So yeah, we have the world whiskey thing that's going on as well, but we have built up stock over the last couple of years, really. I think it's not something we ever did before. We were always, when we first started, it was always buy casks, bottle it and get it out the door, and then we invest. You know, starting an independent whiskey bottling company is an expensive business. We were at the mercy of other people's bottling halls at the beginning, so we fixed that by putting our own bottling plant in Edinburgh, which cuts out a lot of those delays. We still have stock lying around Scotland which we couldn't access, but we have got licenses to hold stock in our own warehouse now, which we didn't have not so long ago. So yeah, we have that sort of buffer at the moment, and certainly access to our continuous liquid side of things. So not just boutiqe-y, but the Atom brand side of things is, you know, we have those streams that we can turn on, which is great for us. As in terms of the independent bottled, you know, the boutiqe-y line, we're still getting some great whiskies coming through, and we've just bought some amazing whiskies, Scotch whiskies, that will be coming up very shortly in our next themed release. You know, that we're trying to run on we're trying to get some organisation in at long last. We're actually planning ahead and actually know what we're going to release rather than just get it out the door. We actually have a plan now with sort of quarterly releases of a theme, and then we'll be slipping out some pretty cool Scotch stuff from new distilleries and old distilleries at the same time.
A quick shout out to Ben Baranow, who's watching in on the Facebook. He's kicking off with a Rest and Be Thankful Lecheg 2007 tonight, which I do recall that particular bottling, and it was very, very good. But I've found that there's a lot of bottlings, and I think there's a few in this room that might have done it, but it's certainly a few other bottlers where you'll find, particularly in Australia, this almost like a wave of 8, 9, 10-year-old Lecheg, and they're all banging. Yeah. And it's obviously someone has released, you know, a batch of bottles into the market, a bunch of casks rather, into the market somewhere. I mean, Eamon, have you, like, do you see that from your end as well? All of a sudden, everyone's got a Lecheg?
Completely, Scott, because, I mean, our business is 10 years old now. And when I think of some of the stuff I've sold, I should be taken out and shot. You know what I mean? It's absolutely scandalous. Because I always thought it was coming back again. Because we're whiskey brokers as well, and we're bottlers, and we've got our own brands, and we represent other businesses. So sometimes we end up competing against ourselves, because should we come across a great cask, should we bottle it, or should we turn it into cash in order to buy some more, because you always think you can? And it never works that way. And then what you see, which is very true, that somehow, maybe it's one of the big boys, maybe it's a broker, releases a parcel of stock into the marketplace. And therefore you see all of a sudden everyone's bottling the same stuff. And really for us, if you look at the guys on the panel today, what we're all trying to do is create brands, because you don't want this situation where you're only as good as the name of the distillery on the bottle. Because you're not always going to be able to get your Buccleuchs and your Port Charlottes and your Optimors and your Macallans and this, that, and the other. So I think the challenge going forward is to really, I mean, Ali's an absolute expert at this, but to really think in terms of where you're going down the line. And to us, a big opportunity is the new distilleries at the moment, the kind of the bigger ones, if you will. Because that way, yes, it's a lot longer down the line, but you can specify, you can give yourself a profile going forward. And that way, if you combine that with building a brand, which, you know, I think North Star, boutiqe-y have done an amazing job. Ali, you've not done a bad job either, mate.
Early days.
But that is the difference in terms of getting a bit of a community where people relate to what you're doing and understand that you're not always going to be able to get hold of a fantastic distillery name. You know, the opportunity for us long term is about building our own brands and getting some kind of recognition that if it's no good, you won't bottle it. You know, and I think that's a challenge. But the running a business, it's very hard to do it that way because, you know, like you've got this bottle today, keep, sell, move. It's always a dichotomy.
Yeah. It's an interesting point, and Alistair, Eamon touched on it. Then obviously you've had a lot of time in the industry working, you know, with your father's brands at, you know, the Ben Riach Distilling Company and Burn Stewart before that, yourself personally. How different is it building a brand that is essentially a single malt from one site to then essentially building the Alistair Walker Taste Bud Appreciation Society? This is what I like, and this is what I think you're going to like as well.
It's complete. I mean, it's funny. I always say I've gone from, you know, gamekeeper to poacher, and I'll be honest. I do think distillers probably in general have a certain way that they look at independent bottlers. I've been on the other side, and there's an element of like we make our own whiskey, and you use other people's whiskey, and now I'm on the flip side. And I'm saying, well, you can't deny it. And I think that's where we all try and do our own thing with the re-racks, etc., so we can put our own stamp on it. The great thing with owning a distillery is that your marketing is done. Your marketing is the fact that you own a distillery. Yeah. That's all you need, is that provenance and that home for the whiskey. And I remember having this conversation with Brown-Forman because they're obviously, they bought our company and they're a very marketing-driven organisation. And I said, look, guys, it's in the history and the provenance of the distillery. You flip that when you become an independent bottler, as Eamon says, you don't have that. You don't have that kind of production site, if you like. So suddenly it becomes not about the distilleries, it becomes about your name. And as you said, Scott, there, it then becomes down to your cask choices, which people are going to judge your brand on. Are you bringing out, and that is difficult, because at the end of the day, just because I like a whiskey or Dave likes a particular whiskey doesn't mean that your customers are also going to like that choice. But it is completely different. It's so different. And the biggest thing with being independent compared to being a distiller is, you know, a lot of the control is taken away from you because you're reliant upon so many things that are not ultimately within your control. If you're a distiller, you're ultimately in charge of how much whiskey you make, what you do with it from day one, and you can almost control the cost of it as well. So it's a huge difference stepping over.
Yeah. Kira, just on that sort of note, we all know Ian Croucher, and the people here in the chat and watching on Facebook. We know Ian very well. He's running, you know, some excellent tastings here at the Oak Barrel. With, you know, North Star is essentially a team of two, really, yourself and Ian, when it comes down to it. Is there any time that, like, he brings something to the table, and he does have some wacky, crazy ideas that work really well, and we love him for it? Is there any times that you have to go, oh, hold on, that's a very Ian cask, I'm not sure that's going to actually work in the wider market, or is pretty much you're in sync?
I think if you know Ian, you'll know that all his ideas are crazy and wacky, and actually mostly it works out for us, so it's good. I think that I am very still much in the learning phase. and I'll probably openly say that I plan to be in the learning phase probably throughout my entire career, I think. And Ian would probably tell you the same. He's very much still learning about market trends and what it is that consumers are looking for. And I think when you export to so many different markets, they're all looking for something different things sell a bit better. So within each release, we usually have about 6 or 7 bottlings, and we do try and make all of them a bit different. So it'll be from a range of different regions, and some of them will be re-racks, some will be ex-bourbon, a bit light in colour, maybe a bit younger. So we're trying to reach each consumer. And I think probably our pricing structure reflects that as well. So within each bottling, there is ideally, something for every taste buds and something for every budget as well. But with the way that we sort of decide what we're going to bottle, we do both taste everything. And although I give my opinion, I think if I turned around and said I think that's going to be an absolute disaster, don't do it. I'm not too sure that Ian would pull the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I've really appreciated learning from him, and his creative mind it just boggles me sometimes how creative he is, and the ideas that he has, and especially just now it's working in that environment. It's just a constant creative flow, and I think that I always say to him, you're lucky, things just come to him quite often, and good things as well. And I always say he'll get a phone call and he'll put the phone down, and I'm like, oh, you're so lucky, people just call you and offer you great things, and things just have worked out really well for him. And he always turns back around to me and says, you create your own luck, which is completely true.
That's quite an interesting little concept. I know that, and I'm quite lucky. I have the greatest job in the world, and I get to drink a lot of great things. But when I do drink a North Star, I do think of Ian and now yourself. When I drink a certain bottling, I think of X who I've met or who I know is behind those bottlings. From your point of view on that concept of trying to do something for everyone, in terms of markets, do certain bottlings work better for certain markets in the world? And if so, where does Australia fit into that? I mean, you all have reasonably big presences in Australia. Yeah,
we do. And obviously we have a few different brands under North Star. So we have Vega, which has been around since the company started. So that's a blended malt, predominantly sherry matured blended malt. We released another blended malt last year under Sirius brand, which is sitting behind me. So that was exclusively first fill bourbon. And we also released a regional range as well, which was all single malt, all single cask, undisclosed distilleries at our choice. Kind of fairly on the younger end, but the whole point in the brand, it was meant to be very modestly priced, all retailing here for about £40. I'm not sure what the price was like over in Australia.
We were about 110 for that range, the Highland Star type thing.
So if I even take that range, the Millennial range, for example, which was a bottling from each region, with exception, there was no Campbelltown, but we had Speyside Star, Island Star, Highland Star and Isla Star. Even within that range, when we speak to Scott, when we speak to Wonderland, we say, what is it that you're looking for? What sells well there? He's quite open in saying, well, I'll definitely take more of. Sorry, my little dog's barking at the door.
He knows what he wants. He wants some Isla Star, I think.
There's nobody there. Sorry. Do you know? So I think people have got lots of problems with babies crying. It's not that's not the problem with me when I do these online tastings. Sorry, I'll just wait for him to calm down. There's nobody there. So within that region alone, Scott will just say, Speyside and Island don't sell as well here, so can we focus on maybe Isla and Highland casks, which is absolutely that works well for us as well, and perhaps the Island casks sell better somewhere else. So there's usually a good reflection in the market somewhere, whereas if Australia take less of something, there's usually somewhere else that wants a bit more of that. So the balance seems to work really well for us. I know that the Vega brand does great over in Australia, They absolutely love it over there. And that's been, that, as I said, that's been around since the company started in 2006.
Send us more, please, and more of that PX as well.
The PX, yeah, I've actually got that here because that is something that they just absolutely loved over there. So just for those who are listening that don't know what we did with the PX, we obviously use a lot of different sherry to finish our casks or to season our casks. And usually when you take the sherry out, you don't really have a use for it, which is a shame because it's great, and we absolutely love it. So we decided that we would use PX to season some of our casks, which had previously contained Islay spirit. We took the PX out and we decided to bottle it. So rather than it being Islay finished in PX casks, it's PX finished in Islay casks. So really different. So I'm hoping that we're going to do one of those again. People absolutely loved it. I was in Campbelltown at the end of last summer, and I don't think people know that we bottle whiskey down there. They're just all talking about the PX. So yeah, something different.
I want to talk about that concept in a second, but I mean, Dave, you've probably got in terms of boutiqe, the broadest range of whiskey. There's only a handful of Scottish distilleries you haven't bottled. You must have some great data about, what distilleries and what styles go elsewhere, around the world. I don't need you to share it, but it must exist.
We have a huge portfolio. Yeah, I think over 165 different labels that are available, plus the specials that we do. So yeah, I have to know a little bit about everything. As to what the world wants, there are definitely pockets that prefer the peatier ones, the Speyside, the older Speysides. There's parts of the world that only want to drink Old Macallan and Old Highland Park, but we're gradually educating them into the younger Speyside stuff there as well. But yeah, we have a huge portfolio, absolutely. There is a handful of Scottish distilleries that we haven't bottled. I think we've gone about the 95 established single malt distilleries of Scotland. So anything that's Kilhoman being the youngest and Strathisla being the oldest, I think, in that lot. 77 of them we've currently bottled now. Some of them obviously we haven't been allowed to name, and some of them that are not actually single malts because we can't buy a single malt from them. They become teaspooned malts, so we have to just call them a blended malt. But I think today, certainly the new whiskey drinkers are exploring so much more. There's no real brand loyalty in terms of I only drink this distillery. I started out as a whiskey blogger, and Whiskey Discovery was my handle, and it was about what's my favorite whiskey. It's normally the next one. And so, always on this journey of exploration. You just want to keep trying new stuff and want to see what's out there. Where's that whiskey that was going to, the whiskey that turned me on to whiskey? Will I ever find that again? I don't know, but it's good searching. So yes, there are people around the world that like different things, but I think generally people are starting to explore everything. And when they see a Linkwood or something, said, I haven't heard of Linkwood before because it hasn't got a brand, and they're open to trying it. I think that's what we're finding.
Eamon, Rest and Be Thankful is part of the wider Fox Fitzgerald brand.
Yeah.
And some people might not be aware that, I think you touched on it before, that there's a lot of, branding and consulting and representing other brands that you do. But I think, as Fox Fitzgerald is on top of most of the trends coming through. What do you see from drinkers globally? Because I know what we see in Australia, and there's, penchant for big sherry, big smoke, and we're starting to experiment with other things. Is that what's going on globally as well?
I think, if you think about independent bottlings, as Ali mentioned before, it was always the big boys used to say that you were a parasite on the back of the work that they've done, if you will. And now you see that Ballantyne's have a range of independent bottlings, and Diageo, obviously they had Flora and Fauna, but they're pushing it a lot more. So as soon as these guys start doing what we're doing, we have to start doing something differently. And I think that to me, a big thing that I've always said is, if you think about the Asian consumer, and a lot of the growth in the industry will be driven by them. in the day, just as Dave said, then they wanted the Highland Park, they wanted the Macallan, and then they want big sherry, okay? But a big thing that I think will be a denominator of change for the industry is education. So if you take young Chinese, young Russian, people traveling the world to be educated, be it the States, be it Australia. Australia's a very much a case in point, be it the UK. There's a younger consumer base coming through that can see beyond a distillery name or can see beyond the brand and want to be the discovery themselves. But that has to be the opportunity for us. And boutiqe-y are absolute masters at this, in terms of always offering them something different, always taking them, always trying to be ahead of that curve. Because if you like, the big boys are almost like your dad in the industry. You know, a brand might be hot. If you see your dad start wearing it, you move on. And it's a bit the same for us. So our job is always to be saying, what about this? What about that? You know, we're involved in the Waterford Distillery in Ireland, you know, which is an amazing project. And again, some of the things happening there that you can do, ironically, in Ireland because you don't have the same laws as you do in Scotland. We don't have the Scotch Whisky Association. So in terms of the wood finishes and stuff like that. So it's our job, if you will, as the guys that pay our own money for those casks and pay our own money for the labels and have to speculate. So it's up to us to always be pushing that envelope in terms of where the growth is. And as I said, a big thing for us is the new distilleries, because we can buy whiskey at a reasonable price, which is very, very difficult to do on the spot market. But we can lay down stock and we can have a plan for the next 3, 5, 7 years where we're dictating the kind of wild and wacky casks. So I think that has to be the way forward. The young consumer, if you look at a whiskey show 15 years ago, I always remember taking my oldest son to one, and he said it was like nobody had seen the sun for 9 months. You know what I mean? It was like a horror film. All these kind of big hulky nerds with the notice books. You go there now, if you took away the whiskey and you said to somebody, what's this exhibition? What is it today? You kind of wouldn't know if it was fashion, if it was education, if it was an MBA, you know, conference or something like that. The world has changed, but it's up to us, you know, to make sure that we're always trying new things. And some will fail, no problem. But and then it comes back to that branding thing. If people know that it came from a good place, yeah, people will go with you on the journey.
Couple of shout outs to people on the Facebook tuning in. Mark Westmoreland, a good friend of the Oak Barrel from the Wolfburn Distillery up north. And I can't wait to see what Wolfburn, when that gets through to independent bottlers. And Matt Bailey from the Society, from the Australian arm of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. But on that question, on that topic, Eamon, of like that old school thinking of the independents being the parasite on the backs of the distillers, it might just be me noticing things a little bit more. But I reckon I saw when Bladnoch got bought by David Pryor, all of a sudden there was some Bladnoch casks appearing under independent bottlers. I reckon when Glenallachie was changed hands as well, I reckon I saw a few more Glenallachie casks appear out of nowhere as well.
I was guilty.
But are distillers now identifying independent bottlers as a way to sort of maybe create a little bit of hype from different angles?
I think distilleries always have. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think distilleries always have been looking. We're a great brand ambassador for different distilleries. Although they've done all the marketing for us, we're also a great brand ambassador for distilleries. And you know, the Scotch whisky industry was built upon independent bottlers. That's where it all started. It was the independent bottlers and blenders that sort of brought the distilleries to the market. And at lean times, independent bottlers take this stock. Yeah, I don't feel like we're looked as sort of parasites of the industry. I think there was a time. I think there certainly was a time that, you know, when Scotch was on its knees at the end of the 90s, 80s, 90s, and Scotch was pretty cheap. You know, distilleries were still closing. Whiskey was more or less worthless. And there were a number of independent bottlers that didn't do the industry any favors. which is why, you know, people like Diageo shut the doors, teaspooning came into effect. So yeah, there was a time when independent bottlers didn't do us any favors because whiskey was cheap and no one was buying it. So yeah, they were bottling any old shite. But I think today, I think the people behind independent bottlers today are passionate about great whiskey. That's why we're here. You know, that's why we're doing what we do, because we fucking love whiskey.
And Alistair, this is a really interesting point, because you're, as you were saying before, just on the fence of this. You know, you've come from the distillery saying, I want to keep all the good stuff for myself. Now you're on the other side of the fence saying, give it all to us. And there is a concern, you know, of what is Scotty from the Oak Barrel going to do with my lovely whiskey? What sort of cask is he going to ruin it with? What is the balance? And this question comes in part from Matt Bailey, who's the ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Australia. I mean, he asks, what role do you see in indie bottlers having, you know, in the innovation of wood policy and maturation? You know, are we going to see, you know, boutiqe or infrequent flyers, ex-tequila casks coming up? So, you know, from your point, Alistair, being so close to both sides, what's the balance there?
I mean, one of the problems we do have in Scotland is that we are still restricted to a certain extent as to what we can do with the whiskey. Obviously, the tequila one's an interesting one, because that's one that it's just changed in the last 6 to 12 months. And I know that Bacardi have already had some product out, that whiskey that's been finished in tequila casks. But I think, and you know, there will, re-racking is something I love to do. We did loads of it at Benriach, and there's certain types of casks that you really like, and that you know that are going to work. So we'll definitely carry on going down that road. I think it's more likely that independents will do that kind of work as opposed to the distillers, because it's very nitpicky, and it's single casks, and it's not, you know, they like to operate on a bigger scale. Where it's, for us, this is exactly, it's right up our street to do these sort of things. And again, it comes back to that point where we want to be involved in actually shaping the character of some of the things that we bottle, as opposed to just taking an original cask and sticking it in a bottle. So I think you'll see more of that. But I think that a lot of independents would do more experimentation, but our hands are tied a little bit, not by the distillers, but by the governing body, that SWA that we operate under. So.
Do you think the distilleries watch the indies and say, hey, you know, that certain style? And I know that, you know, Ian in particular has thrown a lot of, you know, I love watching, you know, the Campbelltown blended malt at 4 years, then at 5 years, and it's the same batch, you know, moving on. Do you think that the bigger boys and the daddy companies, as you sort of put it, are looking and go, hold on, Alistair might be onto something there. Let's, you know, go throw 20,000 litres at something like that.
I mean, these guys know all about wood management, and they know what casks are out there. I think where you do see a kind of something similar to that happening is more with distillery makes. So I think Mortlach and Klein Leash are good examples, whereby 10 years ago they were probably quite readily available, and that their parent company didn't really do much with them as an official bottling. But suddenly, through the work of independence, you know, people would say, oh, Mortlach's a great whiskey, let's go and try a Mortlach from Douglas Lang or whatever. And so suddenly this over a period of time, this cult following was growing for these makes. And it's a bit of a vicious cycle, because what then happens is 2 or 3 years ago, Diageo say, wait a minute, we're going to do our own official Mortlach range. And sorry, guys, but we're not going to sell any of these casks to you anymore. So it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Independents can really build a makeup, but the upshot of that is that they won't get access to it anymore. So, but that's how it goes.
And I know that you guys probably can't say this for fear of, you know, losing relationships, but in that case, so we are completely independent here. In that case, more like completely ruined by a couple of those official bottlings from what we used to love as the indies. I know you guys can't say that, but I'm going to say that one on record. But that's an interesting point. One of my top 3 distilleries, hands down, is Linkwood. And I've had a Linkwood from each of the bottlers here, apart from Alistair, you. So, you know, better find some Linkwood casks. So I still think about that Rest and Be Thankful Linkwood that we demolished one of those nights in Melbourne.
Scott, I have a real man crush on Linkwood.
Yeah.
I just think ever
You and me
since I
both.
saw that, but it was a Gordon MacPhail bottling probably 20 years ago, and I've just since then
Yeah, it's
Tell everyone.
unbelievable story. But for me, built by that G&M 15-year-old that distillery labels,
Yeah.
and then since then,
Yeah.
I look at batch 10 of North Star, for example, which has that Longmorn that I think sitting on your right
Yeah.
shoulder there, Kira. But that's a distillery that I haven't actually looked at for a little while. But I'm going, hold on, I need to go back and look at Longmorn. Is there any distillery, like, the secret's probably out about Linkwood, as you were saying, Clynelish, Mortlake, casks, good luck trying to get them at a reasonable price, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Are there any distilleries that you guys are excited about at the moment that you're seeing come through? For me, it's probably, there's been a lot of Dalyuan casks that have really stopped me in my track. But, anything from you guys seeing that is really, really top quality at the moment?
I'm looking forward to a lot of the new English distilleries. They're making some great new make spirit. I mean, superb new make spirit. I mean, the English Whisky Company will be 14 years old this year.
Yeah.
The new Irish distilleries coming through. They're doing some really interesting stuff down at Blackwater. They've been doing some green malt, which is pretty damn cool stuff. And a lot of these new Scottish distilleries. I've seen Neon have just released their first single malt, all organic. I really like what they've been doing, and I've got some of their liquid here. And I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming up from these new small distilleries. Are doing, they're trying to do something slightly different.
Yeah, just going back to what you were saying, ties into your last question as well, is we bottled 2 casks now from the English Whisky Company, one in our Series 9 and one in Series 10, which again, when they were first released, I think some of our retailers were almost a bit uncertain about it, and ordered kind of minimal amount. And then after a few tastings, I did a big tasting for the Whisky Exchange down in London. And the next day, back at my desk, I was inundated with requests for a few more cases, and it just takes sometimes for people to taste it. It's not even our marketing or how we push the product, but sometimes you really have to get people into a tasting and to sit down and put it in front of them before they'll taste it and actually think, oh wow, that was really unexpected and really different. And that's what I enjoy the most about that part of my job is going to tastings and letting people taste things that are completely different. And just to touch on the Campbelltown blended malt, one of the first tastings I did when I started with North Star was the 4-year-old Campbelltown blended malt, and there was a gentleman in my tasting who was so surprised that we had bottled something so young, and not only we'd bottled it so young that we were quite happy to declare it being 4 years old. And I was trying to explain, you've probably drank hundreds of whiskies that are 4 years old, maybe even a bit less, but you just wouldn't know because distilleries would probably never dare and declare a whiskey to be 4 years old. And he was so surprised with the bottle, and I just absolutely loved that part of my job, is letting people taste things that they would probably never dare think about going near, had it not be for it being in front of them and they're able to taste it and enjoy it.
I mean, that's a really good point about, undisclosed distilleries, because, that Campbelltown blend is essentially undisclosed, and it doesn't matter how many permutations of it's coming to being I put into my head, I'm never going to quite figure it out. Are you guys seeing more and more casks that you can't disclose the distillery name, or is that pretty steady at the moment?
It seems to be pretty steady. I wouldn't say, in my opinion, that there was any more or less before, but going back to the new distilleries, I'm not sure that will change when the younger new Scottish distilleries start to bottle. And just going back to what Dave was saying, I think there's some amazing new distilleries in Scotland. I'm really looking forward to Adelphi's or Ardnamurchan's release. Sorry,
absolutely.
Rassay as well. I've tried a few of their while we wait bottlings.
Yeah.
They're absolutely fantastic. I think there's a bunch of new distilleries in Scotland that, as a consumer, maybe rather than a bottler, that I'm looking forward to from them coming to market. I'm not sure whether there'll be an increase in undisclosed casks in the next little while. I know that sometimes in some of our ranges we choose to leave to choose to leave the distillery off the bottle. And again, it's just a really good talking point, and it's really educational as well at tastings. And I love to really understand why people care so much about knowing where it's from. You know, it could be dram of the night, but if people don't know what distillery it came from, you can just tell it's like niggling away in the back of their mind. So I always kind of like to talk about that in my tastings, and maybe try and shift away from why it matters so much which distillery it came from, even if you're so transparent about every other aspect of the spirit.
Yeah. I mean, and Eamon, I mean, in terms of like, I know that I think you're just putting the finishing touches on what the next batch of RBT sort of looks like. What does it look like? You know, what's moving forward?
You know, perfectly honestly, it's I suppose in soccer terms or in sports terms, this is you have a coach in just to start the rebuilding process, as they say, because what we've had to do when we started, the origin of RBT was that when I set the business up, the first distillery I was fortunate to be involved in was boutiqe-y. And when they sold the business, I went to the directors and said, you know, rather than you boys all sell your cask independently and effectively compete each other, why don't I create an independent bottling brand which works for everybody? And that was, so at the time, cocky, I thought, listen, I'm going to be bottling Baltimore's the rest of my life. I'm sorted. And then, of course, you realise, there wasn't as many as I thought. So I made the cardinal error of selling so much good stuff early on, including to other people, and left myself in a situation where I was able to source casks, but I wasn't able to source casks of sufficient quality. So we really, in terms of the reason why we've done so few bottlings, it's been really, really difficult to get hold of something like that Lechek, or for instance, when Billy bought Glenallachie, I was determined. I got a fantastic Glenallachie in Cherry, but in order to get those special casks, it's very, very difficult, and it's very difficult to plan. So, if you will, what I've been doing is investing in younger stock and re-racking it and filling it, and really making sure that down the line, I've got something I'm a lot more proud of, if you will. You know, it's like as a sports team investing in an academy. So we've got some nice casks, but I think we've only just bottled 5 or 6, just to keep the brand out there. But going forward, I'm hoping in from kind of 5 years to 10 years, we really, really will have some outstanding stuff there. And also the other point was to get it at a more competitive price point, because when I bottled those RBTs, they were too expensive. And the reason for that was that these guys knew the value, because they'd just sold the business for an awful lot of money. They knew the value. So therefore, really, I had to pay a price which was really about building a brand rather than making profit and in order to invest. So it's a learning curve all the time. And as I say, the thing about us guys, there's no safety net. So anything you buy has to be good. Whether it's good today, whether it's good in 6 months' time.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments coming through on the Facebook about, you know, flavour should matter more than distillery name and just getting liquid to lips and all that sort of thing. But another comment there, Eamon, obviously you mentioned then you're buying younger stuff and re-racking it and doing it yourself, and I think, Alistair, you doing that, and I know North Star definitely are. Are filling contracts of new make a thing of the past, or is that a possibility for you guys to walk up to a distillery and say, hey, I'm looking for X amount of new make a year for a little while, or is that a thing of the past now?
Ali?
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's something I actually psychologically find it hard to get my head around planning that. I like to plan a little bit far in advance, but filling contracts to me, it's like you're going to go and place orders for whiskey every year and possibly not do anything with it for 10 years. And to be honest, it's not something I've ever looked at, because I'm not even sure what sort of volumes you would need to commit to even be entitled to a filling contract. I mean, the youngest I've ever bought was maybe 2 years old, and even at that, it's that whole idea of thinking you buy something and then you just have to forget about it for years, which it took me a while to kind of get to that way of thinking. So I've never even looked at filling contracts. Yeah.
But the advantage is, of course, is that you're not paying spot price, and spot price at the moment is often pretty crazy, and you're able to say, we can buy that wine cask, we can buy those sherry casks, we can so much peated, and at least you're able to think about a whole range of profiles, and not be at the behest of the spot market. That's the challenge.
Do you think that the market prices at the moment are at a peak, or are they still climbing? Or is 2020 thrown a we don't know what's going to happen into the mix?
I'd love to think that I couldn't say this is the case. I hope they're at a peak. Because I mean, even in my 2 years of buying stock, I've seen prices go up quite a lot in a 2 year period. And then you kick yourself because stuff that I didn't buy 18 months ago because I thought it was too expensive is now 20% more expensive, and I should have bought it 18 months ago. But like you say, maybe this year is this is going to change things. Who knows? But I haven't seen it level off yet.
No,
but it's so unpredictable. You never know where these things are going to go.
No.
Yeah.
But a lot will depend on the price that the big boys are charging for their standard ranges in supermarkets and what have you. And if the difference becomes ridiculous, I mean, I looked at in Tesco over the weekend over here, the price of a Glenmorangie 10-year-old, the prices are really, really very, very low. So for us as independents, for us to justify that difference, we really have to try and buy well, but we really have to offer something extraordinary. And
I really would like to see the supermarkets without having all of these big brands of whiskey in them. I really would, because they flog them at such a, there's gin alongside it at the same sort of price as a Glenmorangie 10-year-old. There's a lot more goes into malted barley and 10 years in oak than there is in making a bottle of gin the next day.
Yeah,
I would like to see the supermarkets just have the supermarket whiskey and get rid of the
that's what happens in France, to a great extent.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean we do have the supermarkets here, but obviously you can't sell booze in standard supermarkets. They need an off license next to it, so that often occurs. But you can't sell it in the supermarkets. But you do have brands that get flogged through there. But from my point of view, like the Oak Barrel and other indies like us, we see the independent bottlers as the value offering. A 15-year-old cask strength single cask of XYZ distillery in an official distillery bottling, that's going to be $50, $100 more. Is that the same in Scotland that indies are almost the value offering for the juice inside?
Oh, I'm not sure if it is anymore.
No.
I mean, certainly I do. Pricing's funny with independent bottling because a lot of it depends on what particular make it is, but also how much did you pay for it? When I worked in my old job, we had a price list at the start of the year for single casks, and it never changed for 12 months. Now, I'm sure you guys are the same. If you're bottling a Lafroig or you're bottling a Ben Nevis, at 15 years old, you look around the market and see what the other prices are, and then you decide what's going to make sense. But some of these things you might have paid a lot of money for. I do still see. I mean, I keep an eye on Glenallich's single cask prices to see where they kind of sit in relation to independence. But I've got to be honest, it's hard to see patterns anymore. Pricing is really jumping all over the place just now.
Yeah.
The supermarkets do price them as lost leaders over here sometimes. I mean, it's just ridiculous prices when you look at it.
Yeah.
I think pricing is something that we talk about quite a lot, and I think it comes up during my tasting sometimes as well. I think we kind of have our bread and butter at North Star. We have consumers that like to buy one of everything, and they have bought one of everything since the start. And although when we do find little pockets of casks that are amazing, and they maybe are good value for what they are, but when it's going to hit a retail shelf, it is on the pricier end. And so we're still trying to find that balance of looking after the people that have bought one of everything since the start. But when we do come across a really special cask, it's kind of trying to find the balance of looking after the people that have followed the brand since the start, but also you want to bottle these really special casks, like the Macallan behind me is a good example of that. So I think pricing is quite a tricky one. We kind of try and use the same pricing structure since the company started, and Alistair's right, it really just it completely reflects the price in which you paid for the cask.
Yeah. I mean, and this, I don't know, I don't need to, have all the black magic art secrets, but I'm sure there's probably been times where, all four companies have wanted a cask and it's been banging and you pay a little bit more than you want, and then you get a bargain and you sort of blend those margins a little bit to sort of, I'm going to sell that at less than I'm comfortable with, but I'm going to make it back there. Is that pretty common practice?
Absolutely. I always kind of look at I think, we all tend to bottle in batches, whether it's 5 casks or 10 casks or whatever. And I tend to look at what the margin is for the whole batch, because there'll be some that you just can't make the margin you might want and hit a sensible retail point. But there'll be others, as you say, Scott, that you might get a little bit more on. So if it kind of balances out over the piece to be at the level that you're happy with, then, fair enough. They're not all going to give you the same. So I kind of look at it that way. I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, but
yeah,
you're at the mercy of things that are. I mean, there was a cask I bottled in my second batch. I think it was a Macduff, and I bought that on an original litres basis. So I was estimating using the standard industry calculations as to forecast how many bottles I was going to get, and I'm working out my pricing, and it turns out the cask delivered like 20% less liquid, so suddenly my margin just halved. And I couldn't put the price up because it was at the right price, so you just have to say, well, you take the hit, but you might on another one you might get 15% more than you thought you were going to get. So
yeah, that's a really good point, Ali.
These things can even out.
Yeah.
I'm very aware that it's now 11 a.m. where you guys are, and you've probably got a whole day of Monday work that you want to get on with. So I won't keep you too much longer, but I did spy Dave has cracked something already. So Dave, if you could please enlighten us into what you're drinking, because I've moved on to. I
was actually just doing some work, so I got a cask sample there. So I was just, I just thought I got some cask samples in. I just thought, I just might as well just start nosing them, and I did spit. But I have a 1997 Speyside at the moment that I'm tasting. I'm not quite sure which distillery. Is that the Speyside distillery or is it unnamed? I'm just going to go and dig a little bit deeper in a minute. Yeah. So I just wrote the cask number down. So 1997 cask sample that's come in, and it's 50.8%. So I'm not quite sure if it is the Speyside distillery or if it's a secret Speyside distillery, or I've got to dig a little bit deeper. I don't know yet, but it is bloody delicious.
That's part of the mystery and the magic of indie bottlers. There's always something a little bit further to dig in. There's a bit of a conversation going on the Facebook. Some people really like to see where it's from so they can hunt that down again. But I think that lends itself to, Eamon, what you were saying at the very start is, doesn't matter what distillery or disclosed or undisclosed, you're building that brand as
we've got a brand called Pete's Beast, and the liquid for that is fantastic. And kills me as a whiskey consumer, first and foremost, is I'm not able to point at a big building and say that's the distillery and that's the distiller, and it kills you because you want to be able to take the consumer through the journey. And that's what Ali said about owning a distillery. On the other hand, I wouldn't be able to buy that. It would guys like me couldn't bottle that liquid if people weren't prepared to play with us. So it's this kind of dichotomy all the time.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Before I let you guys go, one of my favorite bits, as well as having that person in mind who you're you might be on the other side of the world, but you are drinking with the person behind that brand. And if they've bottled something and you're enjoying it, there's that sense that you have that connection of we like the same things or we're appreciating the same things. So I just want to go around finally and see if there's a distillery that either an independent bottler changed your opinion of or let you discover. Now, I discovered a lot of distilleries for the first time through indie bottlers, but I'm going to say Jura. I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with their official bottlings, but in the past 2 or 3 years, there's been some indies that have really just changed my mind and said, this is a distillery I should jump on, everything. So Jura for me. Whoever wants to go next on a distillery that's sort of been enlightened by independent bottlings for you.
I'd probably go with Mortlach, because the first time I tried Mortlach was, and I'm not this big Mortlach fan, but I do remember you couldn't get it other than through independents. And first time I tried it, I thought it's really good, and then you start looking at a few more of them. It's maybe a bit of an obvious choice, but there you go.
You're not alone on that one. Dave?
I'd probably go back to the independents like Gordon MacPhail, those Glen Tockers that came out.
Yeah.
The distillery labels series. Yeah. I mean, I've never, you've never had a bad Glen Tockers, have you? You've never had a bad Liquid. Why? Because they come from independent bottlers who put their bloody, their name on the line for that cask. So I'm gonna go Glen Tockers. Or there's so many of them in that Speyside camp that that you don't have distillery labels per se, and it's always through independent bottlers. So I'm going to grab Glen Tockers this time.
Kira?
I hear you about Jura and Dalmore.
Oh yeah.
For me, I'm probably going to say I love picking out a really special single grain. Years ago, I tried a North British, I think it was 25-year-old single cask North British, and I still think about it now. It was absolutely amazing, and I think grain's fairly underrated. But thankfully, the Indies do bottle a lot of grain, or we have bottled a lot of grain in the past. But so I think we're kind of bringing grain to light a bit more. But before that, I think it's kind of something that was almost a bit you would turn your nose at before, especially I told my dad we bottled quite a few casks of single grain in our Series 8, and I think he was almost kind of a bit confused. But I think single grain is really underrated even still, and I love finding a really special cask of it.
100%. I'm actually ashamed I didn't bring this up when we were talking about, indies being a bit of trendsetters, because in Australia, there is no love from, the bigger brands for grain. There's just no market for it. But, the North British, the Cambridge, the Girvans, they've been flying off our show. We can't get enough of them. So that's a really good example of a current trend being built by indies in Australia. I don't know if it's the same around the world, but Eamon?
Yeah. No, it's funny since we need to talk off camera, because I went big on single grain a few years ago and I can't move it.
Yeah. I know Ben's listening. We'll get him in.
No, I mean, it's funny. It's so difficult to talk about which one you discovered, because I think Durham is a fantastic example, because I worked at Wyder Mackay and was totally underwhelmed by it when I worked there. I never felt that they had the right offer. And as I say, I bought some casks of it a few years ago, absolutely stunning, and you think this can't be the same stuff. Dalmore, again, Dave just made the point there. Much as I love Richard and I just think automatically that deep dark caramel in there, which is, and you get a kind of an older but fresher Dalmore, absolutely stunning. So again, we're learning all the time. You know what I mean? We're learning all the time, because every cask tells its own story. Is a different experience. So it's I love as Dave said before, the next great cask is the next one. So we'll keep learning.
Yeah, excellent. Well, guys, I'll let you get back to your busy days, so that us Australians can go to the pub and really digest all the information you've given to us. But really appreciate you taking the time out and being on the inaugural opening night for Sydney Whisky Forum. We've got some big tastings and discussions coming up in the week. But I know just going around the room, the next North Star batch 10 is on a boat, I believe, somewhere in the world. It's meant to be last month, meant to be this month. Talking today, it's coming through Wonderland Drinks, and hopefully the Oak Barrel will get quite a strong allocation. Doing this shout out in the hope that we do and can add a few more bottles into that allocation, but end of September for that. The next infrequent flyers, the batch 1 and batch 2 sold out in all of about 24 hours in Australia. So batch 3, I believe, is probably 6 to 8 weeks away from landing in Australia. Boutiqe-y, because of the sheer volume of the boutiqe things, that's pretty constant. I know there's a Glendullen and a Linkwood in store at the moment, and there's something else that I think is just sold, but that's coming through as well. So get onto through the Proofing Company for those, and rest and be thankful. I think you still pulling that together a little bit.
I think we've just bottled about 5, but there's a guy called Aidan Smith who I've worked with for 32 years. He makes things happen. I just talk about it, Eamon,
imagine having to work with you for 32 years.
Needs a medal.
Yeah, awesome. Absolutely fascinating stuff. And from my point of view, really hitting the mark of what we want to achieve with Forum this year. It's we can't all be in the same room talking. And yes, Whiskey Fair is about drinking unique, weird stuff that you never heard of before. It's about, keeping away from the bland. So hopefully some people do that tonight, but also it's about running into people and having a conversation that really only happens once a year and sort of going down the rabbit hole of questions that might not get asked. So thank you very much. Hopefully we will see you all.
Thanks to you, Scott.
No,
Thanks for having us.
I've got the easy job here. Hopefully we'll see you all in a pub or a room drinking booze at some point in the future. Thanks again, appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who's watching on the various streams. And we will be back tomorrow night when we talk Adelphi Ardnamurchan, and then jump into Japanese whiskey talk with Stefan, the author of Whiskey Rising, another good friend of the Oak Barrel. So thank you, everyone, and we'll be back tomorrow night.
Cheers, thank you.
Have a great whiskey week, you all.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Absolutely. Cheers, everybody.